Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is going to be here soon, so in order to get my knowledge of Greek mythology up, I figured it was time to read through the famous poem. I'm Indian Jones, and I'm covering this poem 4 books at a time, and today we're talking about books 9 through 12, and let's get to it. Okay, book 9. We finally get Odysseus telling the Phaeacians his humble story of what he's been through since he's left Troy and how he ended up here. I'm hyped to hear what he's been through. I don't even care if it's extra dramatized or not. At the start of his explanation, he mentions that he was kept by Calypso, which is a story that we already know, but he also mentions Circe, which I'm sure is a story we'll get to hear pretty soon. Odysseus also says he wasn't tempted by Circe at all, and that when you're stranded, all you can think about is going home and your family and not sleeping with someone else. But this guy's gotta be capping. He had no problem when it came to sleeping with Calypso. After leaving Troy, Odysseus and his crew start their journey on Isthmus, where they're basically pirates plundering the land until the locals, the Cicones, turn on them and end up killing parts of the crew, doing a decent amount of damage per ship. Odysseus' crew ends up making it out, but they end up at sea for over a week before they finally make it to shore on the land of the Lotus Eaters. For the Percy Jackson enthusiasts, now we know where Rick Riordan got that scene from. But essentially, we find out that eating the fruit makes a person who ate it forgot who they are, and the only thing they want to do is stay on the island and eat more fruit. But as soon as Odysseus figured it out, he took the rest of his men back and locked them on board so they could leave the island safely. It's crazy how fast we go through that sequence in the book. It's a pretty big lore drop, but it feels like it happens in a flash in this book. Regardless, they sail off and eventually end up at the land of the Cyclops, where it's uncivilized but still pretty green with a lot of fresh animals for them to eat. As they explore the island, they find their way into a cave full of milk, cheese, and sheep, and initially they want to go and grab some food and sneak out. But for whatever reason, Odysseus spends more time in there, and that allows the resident of the cave to make his way back. It turns out to be a Cyclops, obviously, and Odysseus wants to approach him, even though he knew nothing about him. Is this bravery or stupidity? I do not know. He doesn't even know if the Cyclops fear the gods at all. But Odysseus approaches him nonetheless and figures out that his name is Polyphemus, and he tells Polyphemus about the gods and tries to find some common ground, but Polyphemus basically laughs in his face, saying that Cyclopses are stronger than the gods themselves. Initially, it seems like Polyphemus is nice and hospitable, but then he just grabs and eats 2 of Odysseus' men without a second thought and saves the rest of them as prisoners for future meals. Obviously, Odysseus is pissed and wants to fight Polyphemus right then and there, but decided against it in favor of a smarter plan because he knows he needs to take action when Polyphemus moves the rock that's blocking the entrance out of the way, because he's the only one strong enough to actually move it. He comes up with a plan to stab Polyphemus in the eye, but first he gets him drunk on a wine that he had on his ship and gets Polyphemus in a good mood, and when Polyphemus asks for Odysseus' name, he says his name is Noman, or No Man. And soon after, Polyphemus passes out from being too drunk. While he's knocked out, Odysseus and some men stab Polyphemus in the eye with the staff and blind him, which causes him to scream out in pain, but he gets done in by clever Odysseus. Because when the neighbors come to check in on Polyphemus to ask what's wrong, all Polyphemus says is that no man has done this to me, so the neighbors are like, okay, you're good, see ya, it's just no man. And in the morning, since Polyphemus is partially blind now, the crew is able to hang to the underbellies of his sheep and make their way out of their cave as the sheep are released for their daily grazing. The crew then makes it back to their ships and takes Polyphemus' flock on board too, and once they're somewhat out of range, Odysseus gets cocky and starts taunting the Cyclops as they make their way offshore. And Polyphemus begs his dad, Poseidon, to curse Odysseus and his men, which is what starts the grudge that Poseidon had against Odysseus in the first place. Okay, on to book 10. Odysseus and his men leave the land of the Cyclops, where he ends up at the home of Aeolus, who gives Odysseus a bag that contains all the winds that should allow Odysseus to direct his way home. And using that bag of winds, they're well on their way to Ithaca, and they're actually in sight of Ithaca, so everything's smooth sailing, right? His crew gets jealous of Odysseus and angry that he gets all the gifts and the best loot. They think he has something special like gold or some other valuables in the bag of winds, so they tear it open and all the winds escape. How stupid are his men to do something like that when they're so close to home? Anyways, it ends up creating a storm that brings them back to Aeolus, who doesn't want to help them a second time because he thinks the gods are against Odysseus and doesn't want to go against the gods. So they have to row their way through the ocean without the extra winds and end up in the land of the Laestrygonians, who are all giants. If you read The Sea of Monsters, you know that these guys are all cannibals, so when some of Odysseus' men try to have a diplomatic dinner with them, they get eaten up.
I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner.
The rest of the ships try and dip, but the Laestrygonians are super strong, so they're pelting them with boulders as they try to get away. but unfortunately only Odysseus' ship makes it out. From there, Odysseus and his men end up at the home of the witch Circe. And on arrival, Circe drugs a decent amount of Odysseus' men and turns them into pigs. And as Odysseus goes to try and rescue his men, Hermes shows up and tells him he should eat this potion or herb or whatever to protect himself from Circe's drugs, and gives him advice on how to overpower her as she tries to attack him. Hermes basically says that all Odysseus needs to do is sleep with Circe if he can, and that Odysseus can't turn down any of her advances because she's a god. And I'm sure it didn't hurt that she was pretty attractive. But everything ends up going to plan, and she changes the pigs back to human form. And because it's rude to say no to a god, Odysseus not only ends up sleeping with Circe, but he does so for about a year, I think, before his men finally convince him that they should probably leave and head back home. When Odysseus finally asks Circe for a way to get back to Ithaca, she obliges, but she says he has to go to Hades and talk to the dead, speaking to Tiresias, who's going to tell him the way to get home. In the morning, Odysseus goes to tell his men the plan, but first finds out that one of his men, Elpenor, ended up dying after a drunk fall from the roof, so they weren't in a good mood to begin with. So imagine how annoyed the crew must have been when they found out they had to go to the underworld before going back home. Okay, let's talk about Book 11. Odysseus follows the instructions Circe gave him to start interacting with the souls of the dead. The first person up here is Elpenor. He's the most recent death that we've seen, and it happened just in the last book from a drunken fall off the roof, and his spirit asks for a proper burial. Then we meet the prophet Tiresias, who according to Circe is going to give Odysseus the information he needs to get back home. He tells Odysseus that Poseidon is the one that's punishing them for blinding his son Polyphemus, but more importantly, he also says that Odysseus is going to make it home and reclaim his wife and his homeland from the squatting suitors. And he also prophesizes that Odysseus has to make another trip somewhere far away to resolve the grudge with Poseidon. Tiresias also warns Odysseus that he shouldn't touch the cattle of the sun god when he makes it to Thrinacia, otherwise he won't make it home without a lot more suffering and losing his entire crew. Then, after Tiresias leaves, Odysseus tries to talk to other spirits, starting with his own mother, who gives him an update on what's going on in Ithaca and how she died of grief waiting for him to return. Odysseus is ready to end the story there, but the king Alcinous, who he's currently narrating to, begs him to keep talking and really wants to hear if he met any of the fallen heroes from the Trojan War. So then Odysseus is obligated to go back to his monologue narrating the story of the underworld. He talks about meeting Agamemnon, who tells him the story of how he died because of his wife and her taking a new lover while Agamemnon was away in Troy. And Agamemnon tells Odysseus, "You must never treat your wife too well." Wow, great advice, dude. Next, he meets Achilles, who asks about his son. I actually totally forgot that Achilles had a son while he was away in Troy because he was so young at the time. Achilles actually says he wishes he didn't go for honor and a short lifespan, and said he'd rather be a farmer somewhere than what ended up actually happening. He also sees Ajax, who apparently killed himself when Odysseus got more of Achilles' armor than he did and felt he wasn't honored enough. So he didn't actually end up wanting to talk to Odysseus in the underworld. This book was a blur. We see quick glimpses of a few different famous heroes. Odysseus sees Heracles, Minos, Orion, and lots of others. But the highlights for me were Sisyphus, who's famous for the eternal struggle of pushing a boulder over a hill that constantly rolls back down as you get to the top, and Tantalus, who's cursed to never eat again as grapes and water both push away from him as he gets closer. Eventually, Odysseus gets swarmed by souls that want more information about the land of the living, so he runs away back to the ship and makes his way back to Circe. Book 12, let's do it. Odysseus returns back to Circe, where he spends one last night with her and follows the wishes of Elpenor and buries him. On his way out, Circe tells him of the obstacles Odysseus is going to face down the line and how to handle them, and he passes along the scouting report to his men. They pass through the island of the Sirens, who can lull you in with your deepest insecurities, but they're able to get through this using the special beeswax that Circe gave the crew to plug their ears with. Only Odysseus has his ears open and is tied to the mast as he passes through to make sure he doesn't jump in to join the Sirens. The Sirens promise to tell him the future, and the song is so appealing he begs to be untied from the mast, but his men actually do the right thing for once and tie him tighter. But once they make it out of that, they next have to deal with Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla is like a kraken-like monster with multiple heads and arms, and when ships pass by, Scylla grabs one sailor for each of her 6 heads. And Charybdis is a huge whirlpool-like monster that could take down the entire ship. Circe had told them that they should stay as close to the cliffs of Scylla as possible and avoid Charybdis and just risk the 6 men that Scylla needs, as Charybdis would probably sink the whole ship. And Scylla obliges, taking 6 of Odysseus' men.
Oh yay, I'm a sacrifice!
After they eventually make it out, Odysseus gets to the island of the sun god Helios. He actually wants to avoid the island completely, but one of his crewmates, Eurylochus, convinces him they need to rest there. Soon after docking, they get hit with a storm that keeps them docked for a month or so, and initially they were cool with eating what's on the ship, but after that long, I'm sure the crew were ready for a different, fresh meal. Odysseus knows, though, from the prophecy Tiresias told him that if he were to eat the cattle that belonged to Helios, he would only get more suffering and lose his entire crew. So he warned the whole squad explicitly not to eat the cattle, but this guy Eurylochus is a real Judas. This guy convinces the other crew members to disobey Odysseus and slaughter the cattle so they can eat fresh meat, and when Helios finds out, he tells Zeus that Odysseus needs some punishment ASAP. So of course, as Odysseus tries to set sail to leave the island, Zeus hits him with another storm and destroys the entire ship and sends the crew to their death. And as predicted, Odysseus is the only survivor, and the storm takes him through Charybdis again before he finally washes up on the shore of Calypso's island, which, like Odysseus mentions, is a story that we've already heard. It's crazy how fast major plot points and action sequences are happening. In any other retelling or rendition, the Sirens, Scylla, Charybdis, they would get dragged out way longer. But here we get all of this lore in the same book. Also, it's cool to see us get the stories in somewhat of a reverse order. We found out how he got to Calypso's island after we find out about the Calypso's island to the Phaeacian kingdom journey. The reverse time stuff is definitely going to give Nolan some non-linear stuff to play with and lots of stories within stories. Anyways, that's a wrap on books 9 through 12 of the Odyssey. Crazy how we're already halfway through. I'll catch you guys next week for books 13 through 16. See ya!